But I was like, can a genuine nobody launch a podcast and make it work? And the day that I launched, Tim Ferriss was number 1, Gary Vee was number 3, and I was number 2. Sandwiched between them, like the meat of an influencer sandwich. And everyone was like, how's this random geezer like done this? I made a decision there and then that I wouldn't work for anybody else ever again and have all of my eggs in one basket, because that was kind of the situation that I had. So that was probably the life event that made me go, right, I need to do something for myself, by myself.
James Burtt, somebody on the face of it appears to have just drifted through life from one job to the next without really knowing what he wanted to do. But when you get underneath the skin of it, he likes media, entertaining. He likes to make people happy. And this has been consistent throughout his whole career as he's gone from one job to the next to building up a business and his current business, which now supports some of the biggest names in podcasting. My name's Richard Osborne, and this is Drive, the small business podcast from UKBF. James, it's lovely to meet you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No, it's brilliant. You've met or was introduced through my colleague Jacob, who speaks very highly of you, and I feel quite under pressure here as you're sat here in our podcast studio as a podcast expert.
Well, first impressions, I've got to say I'm really impressed. It's a really, really nice setup you guys have got, and I've watched some of the content, some of the videos. You guys are doing a lot of the right stuff. So from a podcast expert, I'll give you guys an A+ so far.
Good, got the grid. Good.
Yeah, there you go.
Certificate on the wall.
There you go. Yeah.
Well, the one of the things sort of found interesting. I had a sort of look through and a bit of digging research about yourself, and you've worked with some pretty substantial organisations, helping them with media, podcasting in particular. What I'd like to understand, because you're an entrepreneur, you run your own business, and something, in my personal opinion, always leads somebody down that road. And I'd love to understand first, tell us about James growing up in school.
Right, it's probably there'll be the version that I'll give you, and if you ask any of my teachers, there'll probably be a very different version. I guess I didn't really like school. I have to be very careful now because I've got a kid who goes to school. I've got a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. My wife's like, don't say you didn't like school, just pretend that you did. I was like, I'm not going to lie to him, but I just won't tell him the full truth. I just found it a bit boring, and not because I'm of over average intelligence or anything like that. I think sometimes you can hear from like geniuses like Elon, and Elon, like we're on first name terms, like Elon Musk, and they're like, oh, school was boring because they were just far too intelligent for it. That wasn't me. I could kind of like coast through school and kind of get away with it, and that's what I perceive it to be. I got away with it for a long time. I just found it really boring, and all I decided that I wanted to do when I was there was to laugh, make other people laugh, have a good time. If you look at any of my report cards, it would be that probably that James is a nice boy, but he's easily distracted and distracts others. Class clown was a label that was levelled at me quite early on and stuck with me throughout the whole of the student career. Drumming on the table, I got into sort of like the drums at about 13. My mate Ben Broadbridge got a ropey drum kit, and from then on we were like, we're gonna be the next Dave Grohl.
In the garage with a load of
in the garage, exactly. That's how we always got told for drumming on the table. But yeah, I didn't think at the time, or even retrospectively for a decade after school, that anything was sort of really shaped the direction that I'd go in. But my dad owned his own business, and that's the only thing that I ever knew was him running a successful little accountancy firm. So I guess that subconsciously probably had an impact on me. But I always had that thing that I didn't really want to listen to people's rules. I didn't want to work for anybody else. And if I got told that I couldn't do something, maybe this is quite formative, if I got told I couldn't do something, then I'd be hell-bent on proving that to be an incorrect thesis. So I was just, I probably, again, when I left, there was a head of year, Mr. Way, who I'll never forget. He now goes out with like one of the lads we went to school with, his mum, which is super weird. But he said to me, you're either going to become a millionaire or you're going to go to jail. I'm just not sure which one it's going to be. And I was like, thanks for that. And I haven't gone to jail yet. I also haven't made £1 million yet. I've probably got closer to £1 million than I have to jail. So
that's a positive.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
So when you a couple of bits, love to sort of pick up on there. So the obviously coasting through school. So it wasn't. I'm interpreting from that generally what was being taught, the lessons, you was absorbing, digesting at a comfortable level. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, and I also, I guess I'd proactively take an interest in learning if I thought that it was going to be of use to me, and I would very proactively disengage, which now as someone who likes learning, I'm like, what an idiot. But things like RE, for example, I don't like rules, because I wasn't from a religious family. Well, my nan was super religious, but that didn't work out. She's like, come and ring the church bells. I'm like, no, I'm all right, thanks, Nan. But that I didn't want to be forced to learn that stuff because it wasn't of interest to me. But things like history and maths I knew would be interesting at some level. And when you could choose like options back in the day in GCSEs, someone said to me the other day, didn't you do O-levels? I'm not that old. But the options that I chose, interestingly, was IT, even though I hated computers, because I realised it would be of use. And I also did a GMVQ in leisure and tourism because it was 70% applied sort of practical expertise and only 30% exams. So I guess I proactively decided that I wanted to use skills that would be transferable to me further down the line. But yeah, as I say, I didn't coast because of having like superior intellect. I could just kind of get away with it, I guess.
So you mentioned that you made your subject choices.
Yeah.
What did you want to be at that period of time?
Do you know what? I didn't think at the time that I knew. But when I look back, do you remember you used to get a certificate of achievement, or a record of achievement, they used to call it, an ROA? Like younger watchers and listeners would be like, what the hell are these two old guys talking about? But it used to be like this big red bound leather book, almost like This Is Your Life. Yeah. And in it, and it wasn't until like years later when I read back through, I was like, I can't believe that. I wanted to apparently own a bar.
Okay.
And I wanted to be a holiday rep.
Okay.
I've never owned a bar, but I did go on and become a holiday rep. But I always wanted to work around entertainment, leisure and tourism, things that basically, if I pull the thread far enough back, that just leads to people being happy, I guess.
I'm hearing that, and I'm looking at what you're currently doing now.
Yeah.
Which is performing.
Yeah.
And what you wanted to do were, a bar. Back in early years, I worked part-time as a barman. You are performing on the bar anyway. Yeah. And leisure and tourism, and you are working in entertainment now. Accountants have a stigma attached to them as being very grey suit, very serious.
Yeah. My dad ticked all of those stereotype boxes as well.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, 100%. That's what I said.
Yeah.
So you're somewhat the polar opposite. Anybody listening to this or watching this, and I'm picking up the energy from you very much, your vocal, performance. Having a father who ran his own business in accountancy, how did that impact, or did it provide any sort of benefit in your sort of latter education and sort of early careers?
It's really interesting with my dad, because he passed away like years ago now, like 10, 11 years ago. So I didn't really think that I was a grown up when he died. I know I was like in my 20s, but I didn't have kids. I wasn't married. I just moved into my first house. And that's one of the saddest things. I look back and I never got to be like a proper grown up with my dad. I never got to be like a dad and have my dad still around. I think that would have been amazing. But at the time I remember thinking, and this was again just sort of like the angsty sort of teenager in me, and that sort of desire to do anything that people told you couldn't do, I wanted to do it. I remember having an awful argument with my dad, and I still remember it now. And I said, everything that you are, I don't want to be. And it's still like, it cuts me now. We're not going to like Bartlett cry about it, even though I know Jacob's trying to go down that angle for this podcast episode. It's not going to happen, or maybe it will. But I don't even really know, because it was just my normal. I was from like a very middle England situation. I lived in the countryside. I lived in like the suburbs. It was all very nice. It was all very vanilla. And I don't know why I wanted to be not from that situation or not from that background. I don't know what I was looking for, but I just didn't want it to be that. So at the time, I was like, I don't want to be anything like my dad. How boring to live 5 minutes from where you work and to have 25 staff and to have a comfortable life and to drive a Volvo estate and to go to work in a great M&S suit and tick all those accountancy sort of stereotypes. But now as a dad, as a husband, as a business owner, I'm like, God, he had so much of it right. I just didn't see it at the time. But I guess it must have subconsciously rubbed off on me. He was a very caring guy, a very generous guy. He was super generous with his time. Very, very bright. Very, like, I could say to him, "What's 37 times 54?" And he'd just know it. He was like just very, very bright guy. He could still remember fluent French from like when he went there at 15. He was just like one of them weird people. But equally, I guess that work ethic that I would watch every January. So he'd get over Christmas, and then January, because of the tax window, he would go into work at 7 o'clock in the morning. He wouldn't come home until 7, 8 o'clock at night for the whole of January.
Yeah.
But then at the weekends, he was super present. I guess it was a different time. There wasn't social media and the internet and all that kind of stuff. But he was a very present dad. So again, now that I look back at it retrospectively with enough distance between now and then, I think actually he got so much of it right. And hopefully some of that absorbed into me and kind of instilled the sort of the person that I would ultimately still like to become when I grow up, I guess.
Mindful that obviously said don't want to be like you. What was your first career choice, and what did you go on to be first after that?
Yeah, so having said I don't want to be anything like you, I set my sights really, really super high, and when I worked in retail, which I think a lot of people do in their sort of formative years. My first ever job, I was at 13, I was a bunker boy at a golf course. Okay. So I lived in this little posh village called Sear Green, which is between Gerrards Cross and Beaconsfield. And Beaconsfield had this posh, fancy ex sort of championship golf club. And my best mate at the time, he went away, I remember at the weekend, and he's like, "Oh, do you want to do my weekend job for me? You get paid £5 an hour." And I was like, that was like back in the day, like £5 an hour, you were a baller. Like you were making a killing. And so I went and raked the bunkers at 4 o'clock in the morning. And again, maybe that subconsciously was instilling some work ethic. I'm
thinking my first job was £5 a day.
I know, yeah. So this, I'd absolutely lucked out. I used to go, but then they said to me, because I'd done a good job of the bunkers, I mean, how could you get it wrong? You rake the sand, like it's not that difficult. But because I did a good job, and because I guess when I was a kid, I was super confident, probably bordering on cocky. I would always be comfortable talking to grown-ups. Like, parents loved me. All my mates' parents loved me, but I was always the one who was getting everyone in trouble. I'd be the one to make us bunk off school, buy the booze, smoke the fags, get in the scrapes. Like, I was always that guy. But my mates' parents were like, "Why can't you be more like James?" Because I was always polite, and I'd be like, "Hi, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, how are you today? It was lovely to see you. How's things? How's your mum?" Because I know she was very unwell. Like, I could probably turn it on, sort of thing. And because of that, I'd meet all these sort of like posh old boys and girls at the golf club, and they just thought I was fantastic. So then when more stuff came up, like driving the buggy at night to pick the balls off the driving range, they offered me to do that. So eventually, that was my first job. But then I went to at secondary school. I finished, got a bunch of mediocre GCSEs, 4 C's, 5 C's, and 4 B's, 5 C's, and a U. I don't know why I can still remember it. And this again was Mr. Way. He said to me, "You're either going to become a millionaire or you're going to jail. I'm just not sure which one." I then decided, in my infinite wisdom, I was going to go back to the same school to do sixth form college, because back in the day you didn't have to stay until you're 18. You could leave at 16 if you wanted to. But I was like, I'm going to do business studies. But again, just because as I sort of unravel it and have these conversations, I'm like, why did I act like such a knob for apparently no reason? But the sixth form tutor was going to give me a detention because I hadn't done some coursework or something. I was like, well, you can't tell me that I have to stay after school now because effectively I'm here of my own choice. So see you later. And they said, well, you've got two options. You either come to the detention or you hand in your notice and you leave as a student. I went, well, I'll do that one then, shall I? And in a big sort of blustering bravado, left the classroom, slammed the door, chucked the book out the window. So all my mates were sort of laughing. Again, class clown thread carrying on. And I left. That was it. So the next day, my dad was absolutely livid and said, well, young man, I hope you don't think you're going to be sitting around here on my dime. Best that you get your ass out tomorrow morning and start looking for a job. So I literally printed some CVs. And again, like a lot of younger people would be like, what's a CV? What, you didn't go to read.com? And I literally walked down the high street of the local town and I walked into every shop, again, confident / cocky young kid with a CV, saying, hey, I'm James. I've got these GCSEs. I'd love to work. I'm looking for life and work experience. I'd love to know if you've got any jobs available. And I literally just walked up and down the high street. And there was a suit shop, a wedding hire suit shop called Prenuptia. And there was a guy behind the till who wasn't that much older than me. I was 16 and I think he was 23. And we just clicked. He said, yeah, I've got a job for you if you want. You're only good at selling. I was like, I don't know. But we'd had enough of a chat. He said, well, you sold me on you, so come in and we'll have a go. And that was my first career.
Was this person a young entrepreneur in their own sense?
So his mum and dad, yeah, he was. So he ran a store, but his mum and dad owned like 3 or 4 stores. So again, he's probably very similar to me. He came from like entrepreneurial stock, like his mum and dad owned businesses and kind of gave him the foot up or the foot in the door. So it was his call
at that young age to take yourself
Yes,
on.
Yeah. So he ran, his mum I think ran because it was a sort of a bridal and a groom shop together. Yeah. So his mum ran the bridal side and he ran the suit shop, and he was just an amazing Lewis Watson. I'll never forget him because he sort of gave me my first sort of shot, and he was amazing at selling, and it was the first person I saw who could like talk people around and basically get them to do what he wanted them to do. And he would get this stock, and he's like, we've got so much of this stock at the moment, and he would like lead people down the path of buying that stock, and I was like, how is he doing this stuff? And he was just, and as I say, because he was just a bit older than me, he was sort of like that big brother figure to me at the time. I was like, oh, he's super cool. I'm just gonna copy doing what Lewis did. He had a VW Golf TDI. I was like, what else do you need in life? He's got a brand new Golf. He's got a nice girlfriend. He's got some money to go out on the weekends. Like he's made it. So I just sort of like copied and emulated and just watched what he did and became quite good at selling suits to people.
Okay. And how long was you there for?
18 months. 18 months, 2 years, something like that. Yeah. And then I got the itch. I was like, it was just the same, having the same conversation with the same people. Yeah. It's a weird, again, when you look back at it, you're playing a role in, because it's, wedding suits, you're playing a role in the biggest day in somebody's life. Yeah. But even those conversations, you're just doing the same thing. And like, do you know what I think it was? That once the game of selling, once I knew how to get people to buy stuff, it wasn't really a challenge anymore. And maybe that's a thread that actually, as we go through this conversation, will come up more and more often. As soon as something becomes a bit easy and it's a bit less challenging, then I become probably a bit less engaged with it. And I remember on a Saturday, because Lewis could sell like snow to Eskimos, he's one of those people. And I remember on a Saturday, my whole sort of like early career with him, the aim of the game was to sell more than Lewis. I never told him that I was going to do it, but I was like, let's sell more than Lewis. And I remember some days in this little shop, we'd take thousands of pounds in, because it was expensive gear. I remember I think I did £7,000 in one day in sales, and he had done like 6-8, and I'd done like 7-1. And I was like, oh, the junior has beaten the master. And then again, probably in my head, I was like, well, what else can this guy teach me? Because now I know it all. When you think that you know it all, by the way, you know absolutely the least. Yeah. But again, you couldn't tell me that at the time because I was just so sure of myself.
You're assessing as you're talking, sort of like learning that sales technique from there, and you're sort of looking back and sort of picking up the thread. Is there any part of you at that time that was sitting, because you're in one situation where your father's turned around and said, right, not on my dime, like you get out and get a job. Yeah. And I'm picturing a scenario, right, well, I'm just going to go and get just whatever job I can, earn some money. You end up staying there for a year and a half. But people who run their own businesses, the majority of them who I've spoken to in this podcast, all have that salesman, saleswoman, that sort of salesperson kind of angle to them. They're salespeople that sell their products. And I take from that there's a bit of a passion or something about them. They can tell a story about their product because it is their product. You've got your first job because you've had to in that scenario, been told to, but you're with somebody who, big brother, learning from. Was you conscious you was learning from them at the time? Was you sort of getting losing interest, getting that buzz of like, I'm in here, I'm in this environment, there's some people running their own business here as well, and I'm out there selling, and are you getting that sort of like hunger in your stomach during that period of time? Was that a bit too early on for you?
Yeah, maybe, but again, I wasn't consciously, like in any way, shape or form, I definitely wasn't consciously aware of that fact, and rather than being sort of cognizant of the fact that I want to learn from this guy because I can learn useful lessons and I can implement them into my life, I was like 16, 17. I just knew that he had the stuff that I wanted. Yeah. He had the skills that I wanted, because the skills led to him having the bank account, which led to him having a house, and he had a fast car,
TDI.
Yeah, and all this kind of stuff. So I was I've always been quite an open book. So I would, be there early. I would stay there late. I would say to him, how did you do that? I wasn't sort of like cagily trying to work stuff out in the background. Yeah. I'd say to him every Saturday, I'm going to beat you today in sales, because I'm just going to prove what a good teacher that you've been, sort of thing. But yeah, I was definitely learning and absorbing, but I wasn't conscious. I was doing it for the golf. that was kind of my methodology. If I learn this stuff, I can have a golf TDI as well. That was kind of as far as my train of thought went with that. I do remember the live event. So I did the holiday repping thing, really enjoyed it. There had always been that entrepreneurial thread though. So I was trying to make extra money while I was away as a holiday rep. I then came back from being a holiday rep and I was a cabaret singer and I was doing all that. Then I was in a band. Then I went back to work by myself in Cyprus as a touring singer. Then I tried to do X Factor and all that kind of stuff and become famous. And then Simon Cowell was like, "You're bang average." I was like, "Okay, fine, Simon Cowell." Sort of stumped on my dreams a little bit. But there'd always been that entrepreneurial thread. And I ended up going and working in the music industry. And the music industry, I thought, I didn't believe in a job for life, but I loved it. I loved it. I loved the person that I worked with. We were only like a 2 or 3 man company at its biggest, but we were working with amazing bands and we were taking bands on tour and we were getting records played on the radio and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, this is me set. This is proper cool. And then it got to the end of one of the months and the person who owned the company said, "Just a question, just an idea, I want to float it by you. How would you feel about being paid in installments this month instead of being paid in one go?" And I was like, I'd feel pretty bad about that because I need to pay my mortgage. Are you telling me there's no money in the company? And she said, "Yeah, that's exactly what I'm telling you." And I made a decision there and then that I wouldn't work for anybody else ever again and have all of my eggs in one basket, because that's kind of the situation that I had. So that was probably the life event that made me go, right, I need to do something for myself, by myself.
I find it interesting that the point where you made the decision to go self-employed was off the back of a situation where somebody self-employed was telling you that their business was struggling.
Yeah.
And that's quite a strange time to pick that because surely some may look at that and think, wow, running your own business is really volatile because the money's gone, you can't pay people's wages. The safer option is to find another company to work for where that bird is around somebody else's neck rather than take that opportunity to run your own business. But you just mentioned there that was your moment where he's like, I'm not going to be beholden to somebody else. I'm going to start my own business. Is that a fair assessment? Yeah,
maybe. Do you know what it was at the time? Again, whether it's that sort of like overarching sort of young confidence, because this was like 13 years ago, 12 years ago. So I was like in my 20s, still sort of like young and naive enough. I could just see all of the holes in what they were doing. I was like, it don't make any sense to do what they're doing in that way, but I couldn't convince them otherwise. So it's weird. So there's only 2 of us who worked in the company full time, but the person I was working for, she had a big back history in the record industry. She was known by everyone, was super successful, but it was just at the point where music was crossing over into streaming and digital and social media was starting to really play a big role in it. And with the best will in the world, wonderful human being, and I haven't spoken to her for years and years, but her son reached out to me actually a couple of months ago, and she was like almost like a mum figure to me. I loved her dearly, but I could just see so many bad decisions that were being made that was almost being made with the mindset of somebody who had made all of their dough in music in the 80s and 90s, where money was just getting chucked at people. And I was like, we don't live in that situation anymore. Like an $8,000 music video, it's not feasible for most bands. Like, we can get a videographer, make something really simple. Let's do a lyric video. Let's do a digital lyric video for £1,000 and then spend the rest on adverts, like online adverts. Oh no, that won't work, blah, blah, blah. So I could see the holes in it. So for me, I get your question. It's a really good point. Rather than looking at it going, God, business is hard, I kind of looked at it and went, gosh, she's made some really poor decisions there. I could do this better.
So what did you, having gone through that experience, what were your next few steps like then, and how do you sort of reshape your business and what you're doing from those lessons learned with that, putting the ladder against a different wall?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, I'd been doing a bit of property investing, or getting into the world of property investing. So whilst I was doing the radio promotion by myself, I was still in that space, and I was like, I'm going to build a property empire, which grandiosely consisted of 2 buy-to-let units in Sheffield, which was about 300 miles away from where I lived and about a 6-hour round trip. So I was like, that's a clever idea. But for a multitude of reasons, that's what I had. So I was like, do you know what? If I double down into property, I already know it. I know a lot of the right people. Then I think I can make a real good go of this. And I could see really easily with property that there was a way to have multiple streams of income rather than just being solely reliant on one thing. So for example, with the buy-to-let properties, I thought, well, if I get up to like 10 units, then I can get to a place where 4 or 5 grand a month can come from just those little buy-to-let units. They don't need a lot of management. They're pretty easy to self-maintain. And through doing great work in the music industry, I had somebody who was going to back me. He said, if you need £500,000, I will give you £500,000. Super low interest. He was a Greek money lender, lovely fella, unless you owed him money. then he quickly became not a nice fella, which I never got to that point. But he was a lovely dude to me always. But he's like, I just believe in you. If you want £500,000, it's £500,000 whenever you want it. Just call it in, sort of thing. I was like, okay, cool. But then equally at the same time, because I've been through a bit of property training, I was like, again, unconscious incompetence. I don't know what I don't know. Let's go and get educated. It might seem like a big upfront cost, but it's not as big of a cost of getting something wrong within property and then you really come unstuck. So from being educated in the property training space, I had lots of opportunities because I'd done entertainment. I could speak on stage. I knew a bit about marketing. I'd run my own companies. They asked me to come in and do training with them. So at one point I had the little buy-to-lets. I had a property management company because that was like a secondary income, and that was managing 21 units of shared houses. We had like 93 tenants. We were doing about 60, 70 grand a month in rent roll from that. And I was also involved in a property trading company. So I had 3 different bits of income from one sector effectively, which seemed fantastic. The only thing was that I absolutely hated tenants. And my whole thing was predicated on having tenants. So I was like, my theory of like, enjoy what you do, I genuinely hated it. I absolutely categorically hated it. And I was like, oh my God, I've done it again.
Why did you hate it?
Because I didn't run it correctly. If I look back in retrospect, again, we were turning over, it sounds like big numbers. We were doing 60, 70 grand a month in rent roll, but there was probably net profit of that was about 4 or 5 grand. So it was very much a lifestyle business, and we just couldn't get it to the point of not being a lifestyle business. Realistically, I should have employed a property manager. I should have had somebody doing the viewings. You know, I missed my mates went and emigrated to the United States for 4 years, and I missed their leaving party because I was sat watching a plumber who didn't know what end of a screwdriver to use, you know, bleeding a radiator in a tenant's bedroom at 11 o'clock at night. I was like, how have I ended up being here? I could, but again, in conscious incompetence, I didn't know what I didn't know about building that business. So, yeah, retrospectively, I should have had some staff. I should have brought some staff in earlier. I feared having staff. And again, there's probably a lot of members of your community, when you go, self-employed the first time you're a sole trader, that first couple of staff, that first member of staff, going from 0 to 1, might as well be going from 10 to 1,000. I guess I've not done 10 to 1,000 yet, but it seems like such a big jump. It seems like no one can do it as well as me.
We've had conversations in the office, and there's a lot of talk about, you know, property. You can make, the £1 properties, as you mentioned earlier. It's easy money. I am massively cynical.
Yeah,
so I'm
you're right to me. You're right to me,
because when people promote and say I'll run courses on how you can make money out of property, and you know, free to attend courses, you come along, you know, the £1 property kind of thing. Sign up today to this course for all the extra things. I'm hugely cynical.
Value stack. Come on for my free course. It's only $3,000 to come on board. I'm going to give you 10% of the information until you join the mastermind. Yeah,
that sort of thing. So I'm not a big fan of that. And then you've got the aspects, the not so glamorous part of property in itself. So my brother had some rental properties. And the stories he's told me about when tenants have moved out and they've taken the boiler, the radiators, stuff like that. Yeah. They've literally ripped off the walls and probably sold it for scrap or whatever they've done with it. And he's had to go in and rebuild all this stuff or have a whole new heating system put in. You don't hear about that. But I've
done it. I've had it. It happens. It does happen.
Yeah. I'm interested when you literally just said yourself just there. You went into coaching, and that really took off. And then you chuckle to yourself there in a sense that, but you didn't. But ironically, as in, because I didn't have that knowledge, but your business really took off on that. Why do you think that is?
Do you know what it was? I've been asked this a couple of times in the last couple of months, and it makes you reflect back at it. I think we hit a sweet spot at the right time. I don't think you can always account for timing. Personal development was kind of like really getting kind of cool here in the UK. I think we're 10, 15 years behind the US. Like the idea, it's a very small percentage of people who would, go to a Tony Robbins seminar over here in the UK, whereas in the States it's more sort of mainstream. So I think we'd hit it at a good time. We had a massive differentiator in the marketplace. Personal development was very, I guess the big companies were like the action coaches and the kind of, and those sorts of businesses. Not that there's anything wrong with action coach, but again, it's very vanilla in terms of their branding and their marketing and their messaging. And we came into the marketplace like bulls in a china shop, doing something completely different. We were really clear on who our marketplace was. We were really, it was kind of like Neanderthal coaching, frankly. It was so basic, but it was basic accountability, get people to take more action, get people to fail faster, give them the confidence to fail faster. We dived into podcasting in 2017, which was relatively early, and that blew up, and the podcast led to us being asked to go and speak on stage in South Africa. And then from that opportunity in South Africa, we got asked to come and do some big events in the UK, and then we got asked to go on stage with Les Brown at Westminster Hall and all this kind of stuff. So we just, action creates opportunity. Yeah. Which ironically is a quote from a mate of mine who runs a property trading company down the road here in Northampton, actually. Shout out to Lloyd if he hears this. And him and Andy have built White Box in the way that they have. Yeah. Because they wanted to build the antithesis of the smarmy snake oil £1 properties, because they're doing developments. Like you're not getting into that for a quid. Like it's hard. Like all property is hard, but that's especially hard. But the rewards, make it worth doing. But yeah, Lloyd's a great guy. But so I think that's probably with that company. We took a step, and that would open another door. And there was just this. I was working with these two former professional boxing WWE sort of like tryouts. It was just very, very different, and we just stood out in the marketplace. We knew exactly who our market was. We knew exactly what we wanted to say. We were unrelenting with our message, and we just hammered social media. And again, when I was talking about fortuitous timing, it's around that same sort of time where the likes of Gary Vee would talk about, document what you're doing on a daily basis, and Facebook were doing Instagram were coming up with stories and all that kind of stuff, and we just literally documented what we did. You'd have thought that the opening of the envelope was the biggest thing in the world that was going on, because that's how we made it seem from a marketing and a branding spin. Yeah. And in 18 months, we took that business from a standing start to touching on £1 million as genuine idiots. But we just took, we'd post 10 times a day on social media. Everyone's like, that's too much. I was like, well, it's working. You shouldn't do a podcast more than we're doing 3 podcasts a week. You should only do 1 a week. It's working. So we just took action, kind of like got rid of the noise that didn't serve us, and just unrelentingly marched in the direction that we thought to be correct. And I think there's something to be said for that. And even if ultimately you're not going in the right direction, at least you're going to find out that you've got to the wrong place faster. Yeah. Rather than if nothing else.
So this is where I'm seeing the link jump from there. You just mentioned like really getting onto the podcast side very early on, which takes into where you are today. Was that taken as a natural step, or a conscious decision?
A little bit of both. So when I something that I've sort of skirted over in this conversation because it hasn't come up, which ironically it normally does because I like to mention it. So I've been on the radio in 2010. I got a gig on national digital radio, and I was like, this is what I want to do. This is going to be unbelievable. This is amazing. But then it just the ex-head of Radio 1 came to run the station. He was like, I just think you're awful. I'm going to sack you. I was like, he was very open about it. A very, very awful man, but he was very open at least. And so that was in 2010. And then I stumbled across podcasting in 2012. Right. And I just fell in love with them. I was like, what are these things? I used to get a podcast delivered to me via MP3. I used to pay $10 a month for this downloadable MP3 every day before it was like on your mobile phone. That's how far back it was. And I just loved them. I was like, podcast, this is a thing, is it? Like people are doing these things.
I was such a late adopter.
When did you get into them?
After we started doing this one.
Oh, really?
Quite literally. Okay. So, and I would turn around and Jacob, who I've, people have seen on our socials, and has his Grow podcast that we've launched now, and I credit from when he started working for the firm. Turn around, he started saying, we need, one of the things I think we should do is a podcast. I was like, podcast? I never listened to him. Don't have time for podcasts. Yeah. I'd Spotify. Massive on Spotify. I live on Spotify music, but my playlist is so eclectic. Literally, I go from Phantom of the Opera to Eminem on the same playlist.
The algorithm must be going, what?
Yeah, literally, Spotify's algorithm has no.
Yeah, it's got no clue. Yeah,
but I just such varied, and I live off Spotify all the time. And I was like, if I'm driving or I'm going somewhere, I'll put music on, and I'll just meditate. And he said, do some podcasts. So then I was like, okay, so I listened to a couple of podcasts. You mentioned, like, we're not going to do a bar on here, like, get you to cry or whatever.
Yeah. But
like, so actually is one of the first podcasts I listened to, the early ones.
Yeah.
And then a couple of others as well, Secret Leaders and ones like that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So I listened to a few. I was like, actually, it's all right. But then what I found myself was I was listening to them not to enjoy them, but listen to, as he was going, what could I do better?
Yeah.
What don't I like about this? What do I like about that? Now I listen to a podcast every day on the way into work or on the way home, and I'm constantly listening to podcasts. But a later adopter to it. But now I listen to podcasts on Spotify more than I do music. It's surreal. But say, for speaking to somebody who's like right in the early days of downloading an MP3 onto your MP3 player, clearly, you was at the forefront of this evolution. I want to say technology. It's not technology, but what is it?
It kind of was, because it was how. So you mentioned it there. So back in the day when I first fell in love with them, as I say, I used to get them emailed through to me, and then I got like an iPhone 3, I think it was, and it had like the big adapter thing at the bottom, and it linked through to your iTunes account. Do you remember we had like an iTunes that you had to like download and all that stuff? And I think I still had like wired internet. All the younger people are like, what are they? Like these two granddads talking about this stuff. But I had like wired internet into my laptop, and I would put the cable in. I could download one,
synchronize it in,
sync. That's it. You can sync your device. It's like, oh, what's going to happen? So you could have like literally like 2 or 3 podcasts before you ran out of storage. You have to remove them from the device. But I was so I was listening to these things. I was doing a commute to a job that frankly I hated at the time, working in broadcast sales. This was between radio and the music industry gig. And I was like, God, these are amazing. This is almost like radio, but no one can sack you. Like, what a win-win. So that was 2012 when I really got into it, and I was like, God, I should be doing this, I should be doing this, I should be doing this. Sat on the fence for 5 years. It's one of my biggest regrets, if I was to have a regret, that I didn't jump in there sooner. Anyway, 2017 came around, and someone who's a good friend of mine said to me, why are you not doing a podcast? Like, I'm listening to these stuff, and like, I think you'd have a better conversation than that person. You should do this. I'm like, oh yeah, I keep meaning to. It's like, well, why don't you just do it? Just do it. So they sort of like said, right, I'll give you 28. I bet you in 28 days you can't launch a podcast. Bet you can't. I think there's like a financial wager. I was like, now I had the bit between my teeth. And like, right, I'll prove you wrong. So I read every blog that you could read about it. I watched every YouTube video you could read, could watch. And I listened to a podcast called How to Launch a Podcast, brilliantly titled. I listened to it 3 times. Once I listened to it, 20 episodes of under 15 minutes. I listened to it all through once without doing anything. Second time I listened to it and I took notes. And the third time when it would say to do something like set up the back end RSS feed or whatever, don't get too technical about it, but I'd pause the podcast and I would go and do the thing that it told me to do. So I launched it in March 2017. I didn't have much of a social media following, only like friends and family. I had no prior experience with podcasting, etc., etc. And all of the people that were doing it at the time were big celebrities. Obviously, the landscape's changed a bit now. But I was like, can a genuine nobody launch a podcast and make it work? And the day that I launched, Tim Ferriss was number 1, Gary Vee was number 3, and I was number 2. Sandwiched between them, like the meat of an influencer sandwich. And everyone was like, how's this random geezer like done this? And like any good marketeer, everyone was asking me, how did you do it? I didn't really know, but never let the truth get in the way of a good story. So I was like, I've got some systems and processes. And I'd worked with like Nando's and Thomas Cook and Nissan and Xbox and Nintendo back in the day doing PR. So I just applied PR principles to the launch of this podcast, and it had worked. And that was it. That was me off to the races. So I launched that first podcast. And then a mate of mine who was a coach said, could you launch a coaching podcast? Could you do the same for coaches? I was like, don't know, don't see why not, let's do it. So we did it, and that was a success. That ended up launching the coaching company. Then a PT asked me, a financial advisor asked me, and I basically was just doing one-to-one coaching with people. I was just helped people because I liked podcasts. I was like, I'll see if it'll work or not. And then I developed this system. So fast forward to now, we've launched 167 podcasts for clients now around the world. We've worked with Military Wives movie. We've worked with actors, athletes, celebrities, influencers, all sorts of different people, mentors, coaches, experts. We've probably launched more shows than anyone else in Europe. And we still, the whole launch process now, 6 years later, is still the same one of how to plan, produce, launch, and grow a podcast that I learned 6 years ago from YouTube videos and blogs.
So I think that's quite consistent with business advice. When you're looking at business advice and so many things in general, the technology may change, but the underlying principles of good business is always, it's the same now as it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Buy for X, sell for Y, and there's a profit in the middle, or whatever, marketing, promotional, be where your customers are, whatever. They're all the same principles.
Yeah.
There's no way you're going to give any different answer to this other than the one you're going to give. But you've been through a whole different varied changing careers, from coasting and not sure what you want to do, sort of making people laugh, and having sort of being happy in what you're doing, or going for the golf TDI.
Good remember.
What they may be. I keep going to say golf GTI, so it's a TDI. What those may be. When you look at and the fun of property, when you look at what you're doing now, are you at your happiest?
Yeah. Yeah, and because I've now taken the joy of actually running a business as well. Like that, when I was in the music industry, the reason why I didn't want to leave it entirely to move to property to start with was because I thought that I loved music and I loved the music industry, but I didn't. I actually just loved the enjoyment of what I was doing. I loved the enjoyment of working with cool bands. I loved the enjoyment of taking like a new artist and helping them to break to the next level or whatever it may be. But what I didn't realise at the time is that I liked business, and I thought that the thing that I liked was the music industry business, but it was just business in general. So now I would say that I'm at my happiest because I've got two things at play. I love podcasts. I started out podcasts as a fan of them, and I'm still more of a fan than a worker in the podcast sector, if that makes sense. Because of how many podcasts we've done now, I've got a great reputation in the marketplace, so I get asked to do cool stuff. Like Business Insider will reach out about an article, or GB News will say, hey, can you come on to the TV and talk about this, that and the other. Often, like people who are big in podcasting will have conversations about what's coming up next, and the podcast show will ask me to do stuff for them and that kind of stuff. So that's super cool. But I also get to have the enjoyment of the thing that I make, and I also enjoy the business side of it as well. So yeah, and now I think I've sort of almost like a triple enjoyment now that I understand how to, I wouldn't say I know how to manage people as well as I can do yet. We're only a team of 5 people still, so we're a relatively small company, but now I understand the concept of how to get the most out of people and to bring somebody into your organisation to make it all rise. All boats rise on a high tide. If I can bring that person in and build the business up, then I think that's a complete win-win. So now I've got a passion for podcasting, for people and for business that's all swirling. Now to preempt that, business is not easy. You're always going to have challenges. You will have months where the cash flow will be tight, or a big client leaves, or there'll be a client that comes on board and they end up being a nightmare, or the project you thought that was going to be amazing doesn't end up being amazing. Or again, when you get to a different level, now we've got bigger companies that are looking to work with us, and bigger influencers and bigger celebrities, so there's more red tape and there's more stuff you have to tick off, and there's always going to be a challenge. It's never all beer and Skittles, but yeah, I genuinely really, really enjoy it. And one of the things, again, the overarching principles that I guess I didn't realise at all at the time was that I wanted to have flexibility and freedom. That was two of my core drivers, flexibility and freedom, and I wanted that because that's what my dad had. When we were at school, my dad came in on a Wednesday afternoon and used to teach electronics because he could. He ran a company with 25 staff, but he was always there to take us to football. He was always there for dinner on the table. He was always there if I got in trouble at school, which was infinite amount of times. He was there in the headmaster's office within half an hour. So actually, the driver that I've got is to have that freedom and flexibility as well. But again, it's not always easy. It's not always, rainbows and unicorns. You do get tough days. You do get the times you're like, Jesus Christ, is this all worth it? You think back to that time you did have that employed job, that PAYE salary with the pension contributions at the end of the month. You go, oh, was that the easier thing? But ultimately, I think I love the game of business. And I think maybe that was the thing that I was always chasing, was the enjoyment of the game of it.
So when you how do you approach the game of it? When you're having those moments of, I could have a normal job, and things are tough. What is the bit that wrenches on your gut to make you drag yourself out of bed? Is it just the game of it, or is there something deeper that just makes you think, no, I'm getting out of bed and I'm going to go to work. I'm going to face that. I'm going to face today.
Do you know what? Again, going back to sort of shouting at Lloyd, I think that whole mentality of that action creates opportunity. I never, even in my darkest moments, even at the really, really tough times, I never struggle to get out of bed. I never just want to pull the covers back over my head and just go back to sleep. Normally, because if it gets that bad, you can't sleep anyway. Most business owners will either have that thing where you can't get to sleep, or if you do manage to fall asleep, then you can't stay asleep because of like, your swirling mind and all the rest of it. So, but I've never got an issue to get out, because I always think that even at its toughest, I can outwork a situation. I don't think that's always to my benefit. I think sometimes I will work hard in the absence of working smart, and sometimes I have to pull myself back and go, right, is this the smart thing to do here? Forget working hard. You're not trying to prove anything to anybody. You're not trying to, 18-hour days as a badge of honour. I've done that, and I'm like, actually, that doesn't serve my greater purpose to be a good dad and a good husband and to be present with the family and all that kind of stuff. But I've just always believed that if you take a step of action in the right or the wrong direction, it will get you to an outcome. And ultimately, enough steps will get you to somewhere. So, again, it's not sort of like a love for the job or a love for the game that gets me out of bed. I just know that getting out of bed will be the resolution to the challenge, even if you don't want to.
I think I may know the answer of this from some of the things you said, but what are you doing it for?
Because I enjoy it. I'm doing it because I enjoy it. I'd love to say that I'm trying to build an empire or build a legacy, but I don't think I'm at that stage of my career at the moment. I just really enjoy it, and I think that the aim of the game at the moment, within 3 years, I want to sell out my agency to a bigger agency group, purely for the purpose of playing the game. I've never built a business and sold it, so I want to go through that process. Have I got the minerals? Because I think I have. Okay. But maybe I haven't. I might be completely useless. So I'm doing it because I want to prove to myself that I can do it, because I love the challenge of it. Because there has been times, I've had opportunities even recently, from the big brand work that I've done. I get a lot of like sort of high net worth CEOs reach out and go, could you do like brand consultancy? I could quite easily take on 2 or 3 clients, make 20 grand a month and have a really comfortable life. And sometimes I'm like, I should definitely do that. But then the overarching thing is, I want to, by December 2026, I'm going to sell out the agency. Even if I still work for that bigger group, I'm going to sell the agency into a bigger media organisation to prove that I can.
Not for the financial gain.
Oh, and that, 100%, yeah.
But it's interesting you say to prove that you can, as your first point of statement, as opposed to to build a nest egg or whatever it's going to be, or to buy a castle, whatever it might be, or to get the latest Volkswagen Golf. Your immediate go-to is to prove you can sell a business. Yeah. Because
I think there's the steps. Maybe that's the overall aim and the target, but I think subconscious to that, you have to become the person who can do that. Yeah. I'm a big believer in be, do, and have. Yeah. You have to be something, then you have something, then you can do something. But I think a lot of people get it the wrong way around. They aspire to be, do, and have, but they want to do, have, and be. It's in the wrong order. If you won't give a tenner out of 100 quid, you're not going to give 100 grand out of 1 million. You're just not that person. If you're not going to back yourself on, going on your side hustle, you won't back yourself to create an empire. So I think are more interested in the person I have to become.
I
get there.
use a same thing but slightly different. Is I always say that be the person you need to be.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Yeah.
So that's interesting in that sense. That okay, so that's your next objective to go. Do you see anything beyond there at the moment where you are in your?
No, not again. I've done that whole thing. I don't think I'm very good. And I know there's no good or bad. It's all a perception. But whatever. I've tried to do that like 5-year goal, 10-year goal. What's your legacy going to be? Blah blah blah. I just can't see it. Yeah. And I've tried. Every New Year's Eve, you sit there going, right, what am I going to do? Who am I going to become? Who could I forecast myself, becoming in the ultimate? I don't know the answer to it, but I can see 3 years down the line. I can see it, and I've been reading a great book for businesses of a certain size, Traction, an amazing book by Gino Wickman. I don't know if it's come up on podcast episodes before, but that sort of gives you a premise of what you're going to build in the next sort of 36 months, and that just seems to fit really nicely with me. If I could sell, in let's say December 2026, that's my sort of sale date. I sell out the agency, or I shouldn't say sell out because it's got a negative connotation. I sell the agency into a bigger organisation, and they say, hey, we want you to step back from the sort of the day-to-day operations because you're an awful operator. You should be here because you're good for morale and you know the industry really well and blah, blah, blah. And you can just spend all of your days making cool content, helping people to achieve their own goals through podcasting or
Chief
content.
Happiness officer.
Something wafty like that. Yeah, I definitely need one of them, like on a plaque on your desk. Then I'd be quite content to do that. Like today, for example, got up super early, did all my Wim Hof breathing and all that stuff that I like to do to be a good human being. Went out for a aspirational walk, took my kids to school, drove up here, got a client meeting after this. I'll drive back home. Happen to be super fortunate to be married to the love of my life. We have a really nice life. If that's it, I'm kind of comfortable with it.
Yeah, no, it's very. You just said it now, and it's something I firmly believe in. There's no right or wrong. There's desired outcomes, and is that what you want? Every action has an outcome, and if you do an action and that the outcome happens, and if that's what you want, and that's right. Some coaching training I've done for young people has that concept of to start the course and working with this charity is there is no right or wrong. So it's drilled into you as the part of your coach training is like get the whole concept of right or wrong out your head. You're working with these young people and they have desired outcomes they need for their lives. So you just working on cause and effect. And
it's important to be aware of that.
Yeah.
To your point, it's really important to be aware of that because I think otherwise you can look at, I know we sort of mentioned him a few times, you can look at like a Stephen Bartlett, you can look at all the people that he's interviewing in his podcast or high performance podcast with Jake Humphreys and Professor Damien Hughes. I've interviewed Damien for my own podcast, so I know him quite well. And you can look at all of these people that you hear or see on media pedestals and go, oh, I should want to do that. I've got no desire to build a 200 person agency and sell it out for valued it up at 500 million quid. I don't think that I will ever be the person that I need to be in order to run that outfit. But what I can see is that I can have a 25 person agency that turns over 12, 15 million quid a year, that has a good 30% profit margin in it, that gets sold out at a multiple of 8 times revenue. Happy days. I can see that person. I can see that becoming me. I'm not that person yet, but I can see that I could become that person. I can see that I want to become that person. I don't want to own, I don't think, or operate a publicly listed company. I don't want to be a CEO of. I've got a mate of mine who's the ex-CEO of Thomas Cook. Had at one point 12,000 staff. I just don't want it. I've seen the grey hairs on him. I don't want it. But I think it's really important to be aware of what you actually want, like in your soul. And it's not to get sort of like all like spiritual woo-woo, like the law of attraction, but be aware of what it is that you're actually chasing, because otherwise you'll create disalignment. Consciously or subconsciously, you'll create a disalignment. If I said to you in this podcast, I'm going to have a 500 people agency with Google style slides from one floor to the other and fake grass, and we're going to have a like a juice bar, and everyone has to have a lemongrass juice shot at the beginning of the day, and we're going to have a big office in central London. It's not what I aspire to have, but I could pretend to, because that's what everyone's saying that you've got to have. But a 25 person office where I get to have the freedom to do amazing podcasts and great content and be a thought leader within my space and help other people to launch amazing podcasts that can help them to explode their brand. Yeah, I can see that.
That's some would use the being true to yourself, which is very important. It's been fantastic having a chat with you, James.
Thank you very much.
I loved I see within your journey as what you're doing. It's you've flown like water down a stream, as you're sort of talking, where you
with a few rocks in between.
Sort of starting off probably sort of coasting on the start, but everything, whether you was conscious of it or not, comes across as that you knew, or you internally knew what makes you happy, what you wanted to do, but the path wasn't clear to you right at the outset. And then now it's great to hear that you're enjoying what you're doing. You're working in podcasts, earlier understanding of podcasts and listening to it. I'm pleased that you like the environment here as somebody who's new to podcasting. Thank you for sharing your journey. It's been great speaking to you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed watching this interview. Please remember to hit subscribe and like. It really helps us with the algorithms for YouTube, and I'll look forward to bringing you more interviews in the next episode of Drive, the small business podcast from UKBF.